were never meant to be put together, and they contradict each other, so you're out of luck.
Right.
And so my prescription is a wiring diagram that starts at the very beginning with the external outputs and the assumptions, and goes all the way to the final use. And such diagrams are horrendously difficult to put together, especially in a place like City, where there's probably 7 layers or 8 layers of things, many of which are loops through a database.
Right.
That and But if you do that, it's very illuminating, because you really see things like, how often is this model used? You might have thought never, but in fact, it's used every single time you do any calculation, because it does something to the database.
Right. So you're dependent on it until it ends. He also talks about orphan models that are just in inventory, but they're not used anymore. He meaning John. Um,
Yes.
and then his basic 2 steps that, have an ID, as we said before, but have that ID in the source code so you can see, you can keep track of that. And what is a model transponder function?
That's the thing that when you use the model, it sends something to a central location. Transponder is a term from the Navy,
Yeah.
that like every ship, uh, except spy ships sometimes, has a transponder that always signals where on the ocean it is.
Okay. So it's like, hi, I'm here. Hi, mom, I'm here kind of thing.
Yes.
Okay.
And so the model transponder is sending, hi, my name is
Right.
model 257, and
Right.
I'm here, or someone's using me. Here's the person using me. I'm being used. And when you go to count up how many times it's used, add 1 to that, because someone's using me right now.
Right. So then the question is, it gets back to what we were saying last week. So this means we need tables, we need a data model that can capture the important parts of a model. For example, he suggests the version of the model, because
Yes.
one of the other risks he points out, of course, we've seen that, is that different parts of the banks are using different versions of a model. Or I can say a corollary, that one has this license for numerics and one has another one, and those two are not managed properly, so they're different versions.
And we know that in large enough banks, every single software company that has ever existed,
It's
someone in the
somewhere.
bank is using it. And they may not actually be using it, but somewhere they're paying for a license.
Right.
And you may not even be able to figure out what's going on without this transponder, because if I get a version of the model that assumes you have some license, and for political reasons I don't use that third party software, I use a different one, so I change which vendor's function call it has, but I didn't really change the model itself, so I leave it as the same version. And then someone says, "Oh, but here in Norway, we have this weird rule about bonds that aren't mortgage backed. So let's just put a tweak in it specifically for Norway. But we didn't really change it much. Let's leave it as the same version."
Yeah. Yeah, I think if it's not already, and I'm looking at the things that he thinks are important. I don't see third-party dependencies, and I don't see dependencies in general. Maybe the just having the IDs in there might make it easier to make the correspondence, but
Yes. Well,
uh,
I mean, it's
or
it's
enforce
necessary.
it,
It's
maintain it.
necessary, but not sufficient.
Right. So dependencies, I think maybe he addresses that later in the paper. Um,
Well, I think part of it is he defers to my paper, which only talks about dependencies and
okay.
nothing else.
Okay. So I'll combine the two. I think, sounds like an advanced topic, but it also sounds like it's worth a little discussion in the paper, in the book, about
Well,
something that people can think about.
My theory is that we have three authors for the book, and anything any one of the three has ever done is probably going to wind up in the book because
Right.
you this is my only book. It's my only chance to put anything like that in a
Right.
book.
Right. It's like that baseball movie when he has one at bat. Yeah, that's his whole career. Not like that Spanish kid who's going to be playing for now for 100 years, right? So the one who, the 16-year-old, that 16-year-old, I guess scored the winner or made was part of the win yesterday. But earlier, my younger son pointed out that he played a game somewhere in Germany, and because of German laws, it was like after 11 p.m. So not only could he not play in the game, being 16, under 17, but he had to actually physically leave the stadium as a member of the Spanish national team, which is hilarious. So fortunately, last night the game didn't go that late, I guess. Um, good. Okay. Well, maybe there's not a whole lot else to say on this, but I thought, yeah, to put this somewhere either in the AI section or in the inventory discussion, which I think now is in model governance, or both, or yeah.
Mhm.
You do get the first acknowledgement though here, so in the paper. That's good. Ken Abbott, right? Peter Russo, Baruch College. Yep. Good. So second thing I wanted to talk about was just to try to get and here I can share. Uh and then I'll minimize this so we're not looking at ourselves. Okay, minimize. There's the agenda again. Um Martin, I projected this on my TV, but now I can't figure out how to make it one big screen. So I have a great copy of everything we're doing, which is completely useless if I want to use two screens. It is what it is. Okay. So if we go under bookmarks, yeah, so I've sort of compiled, let's see, bookmark manager. How do I get this up? Well, you can probably see from here. So in addition to SR 11.7, and right, this is a mix now of a bunch of things. But like this one is one you've mentioned. The question
Yes.
is, are we, I think it might be good to make sure we have a complete picture. FDIC has something I'll mention in passing, but sounds like after SR 11.7, this is probably the most important one.
Yeah, because this is, as you can see, it's based on SR 11.7, which the
Right.
OCC calls
What's the
2011-12. It's
right?
the same, it's word for word the exact same thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
But this is expanded to uh, an examination manual where you can expect as a bank to get questions from this manual. So if you read it, you won't be surprised.
Yeah. I mean, first off, if we put this in the paper, in the book, then we have to make sure everybody understands who regulates who. So the Fed, of course, is bank holding companies. The OCC, as it says here, primary is national banks
It's
and federal
complicated.
holding.
It's more complicated than that.
Right.
That you can, if you look at a bank's formal name, it ends in either NA or SA.
Okay.
The ones that end in NA are regulated by the OCC.
Yeah.
The ones that are regulated in SA are regulated by the Fed.
Okay.
At some point about 15 years ago, right after the crisis, and banks were worried that they were going to be too heavily regulated, they switched from state regulated from NAs to SAs because they thought the Fed would have weaker regulators. And as a consequence, the Fed hired away some of the better regulators from the OCC.
Right.
And so that sort of regulatory arbitrage didn't work. But once you switch, it's very hard to switch back.
Okay, so this is food for thought. I guess, I don't know how long this is, but it came out in 2021. There you go. So 10 years after SR 11.7 and 2011-12.
Yeah, it's long.
So I'll look at that, but presumably I can do a fine. And Now, as far as other agencies, so if I go back to where's my uh FDIC, it may be easier to Google it, but let's see. I thought I had this a minute ago. Yeah, Dan's papers in the Hamptons. We don't want to look at that. But let me just Google it. FDIC, it's 2017 model risk guidance. So this is when they formally adopted the Fed and OCC. And the Fed manages, I don't know, there must be overlap between that and the OCC, right? But I did some statistics that, because first of all, you'll see, okay, let me not get ahead of myself. The Fed manages about 4,500 banks. And they tend to be commercial banks and savings and loans, ones that have savings accounts, because FDIC insurance, of course, is that. In this paper, they say we're going to adopt SR 11.7 and OCC 2011, but only for the larger institutions. So then larger means the floor is $1 billion. So then you can ask, how many of those 4,500 banks are $1 billion? It's about half, about 40%. If you like, in powers of 10, if you go up to 10 billion, these are actually what based on Fed statistics, but in this country, 6% of banks have more than 10 billion and 1% of more than 100 billion. So the Fed covers all of those. It just doesn't cover the 60% of banks that are less than $1 billion.
Right, those are all FDIC.
FDIC.
And
Yeah.
and
So
FDIC also
right.
covers parts of OCC and Fed banks
Okay.
because all of the deposit insurance is FDIC.
Right.
And so that they all have to
They overlap.
bank holding companies no, but the banks under them are all to some extent FDIC regulated because
Okay.
anyone who has FDIC insured anything has to have an FDIC regulator exam to make sure that they're worth insuring.
All right. So yeah. So if I tell me if I have this right. So we have the largest banks, then the holding company. It's like the Goldmans, in the cities. Then we have the national banks. Then we have the savings and loans, and then we have the community banks, which I think they try to distinguish.
Yeah. It's a bit more complicated, I'm afraid.
Well, but just to say, the 1 billion I think would primarily apply to smaller savings and loans.
Yes, the 1 billion are like local banks, savings and loans, and small banks. And there are breakpoints at 1 billion. There's another breakpoint at 10 billion. There's a breakpoint at 100 billion, where if you're over 100 billion, you have to do DFAST, and
Right.
over 250 billion, you have to do CCAR. So there are only like 18 CCAR banks.
Yeah, 100 billion. That was the statistics I said a minute ago. There are 60 banks, according to the Fed, at least last year, over 100 billion.
Right, and those are the DFAST banks.
The top 1%. Yeah.
And like my current employer has decided that they want to grow to 99.9 billion in assets.
Right.
But not a penny more because they did DFAST 1 year before they got out of it, and it was not a happy experience.
So that's more onerous. Okay. Yeah, I have to understand better the differences between the two, because everything I read, it makes it looks like it's the same thing, but I guess different scenarios and different.
It's the same scenarios.
Okay.
That's pretty much the only thing about it that's the same.
Okay.
Yeah, I just want to say, yeah, it is actually pretty complicated. And in the US, a bank has some leeway, they can actually choose if they want to be NA regulated by OCC, or if they want to just have a state license, possibly from multiple banks. It works just as well. Yeah, but there is this, SR 11.7 is actually joint agency guidance. So it's it belongs to the Fed and OCC and FDIC. It's exactly the
Right.
same text. And other regulators can basically say, well, we like this regulation. We're actually going to, impose it on other banks. Yeah, I sent you in chat. I'm not sure if you can see something I noted a few months back. So it has a link to this OTC paper that you have. There's also, for example, Canada has some
Yeah.
guidance on Model
Canada, I
A.
have in this list. I have the that one, which I'm just too much of a boomer and I can't bring it up. But Canada was in there, UAE. I mean, that goes to this other appendix where we compare across countries. For this, I wanted to make sure that we got US complete because I hadn't done that before.
Okay. So in the US, yeah. So for example, we have some guidance for mortgage institutions, which is mostly in line with SR 11.7, and it only applies to some institutions, but generally kind of regulators say, well, even if it doesn't apply to this institution, we still like it, and we would like folks to follow it. And yeah, if you take a look, so in terms of lineage, yeah, everything kind of flows back to SR 11.7. This OCC paper is very interesting because it basically started out as kind of a work program for examiners. These are the things you're supposed to look at, and these are the questions you're supposed to answer. And then they figured, it's kind of nicer to let the, NA institutions know what OCC actually looks for instead of, starting an exam and hitting them with a surprise. This is what we expect. This is how we interpret 11.7.
I'm listening. I got a sick kid upstairs. I just got to figure out how much Tylenol I should take. But I'm listening. Yeah. Go ahead.
Oh, so sorry. No, that's all. Yeah, but basically, yeah. My point was that this choice of who regulates what in the US is kind of complicated. I don't know if you actually want to go into it because details are very complicated. But generally, the guidance is consistent. There's SR 11.7. There are these basically commentaries from OCC. Yeah, in a sense.
And the Fed and the OCC talk to each other to make sure it's consistent.
Yeah, absolutely. They usually do joint exams if they look into the same situation.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. That you will often have the bank holding company is one and the bank that it's holding is the other. And then the bank has a subsidiary bank, which is a little FDIC bank. And so you wind up with all three of them at the same exam.
Yeah,
Right.
and they write the joint product memos.
And my record for one exam when I was at Citi was 7 different regulators at once.
Yeah.
And it was like all 3 from the US plus New York State plus the National Bank of South Korea and Mexico and I think Chile all at the same exam.
Right.
And although they're all based on SR 11.7, which is based on OCC 2001-16, which is based on what Citi used to do in the 80s. They won't say that, but really it's based mainly on what Citi did in the 1980s.
Yeah.
And a few other banks, they'll admit, yes, we talked to banks before we came up with this, but it's not from whole cloth. It was from the banks that they examined already doing a lot of that stuff. And then all the other countries want to prove that their regulators are tougher than anyone else. So they'll all impose some weird thing that's not in OCC or Fed or FDIC regulations just to show that they're independent of the US and they can come up with things that no one else does. I think like Poland, if you have customer information, it had better be on a server in Poland. And if you try to cross the border with your information, you get in real trouble. Mexico was, if you have a model, you have to every year rebuild it from scratch
Right, I
to prove
remember.
that you can. And they all have things like that just to show they're tougher than the other guys.
Now, what about so coming back to the US though for a minute, so of the less common agencies like CFTC, NCUA, the Futures NFA, and SEC, I saw there was some SEC guidance, but it seemed to be more like very specifically for a vendor and things like that. Let me find that. I
Yes,
think largely they
SEC,
don't provide guidance, right?
yeah, SEC has some specific stuff on models for swap dealers, but it's
Right.
kind of more on frequency of validations. So, for example, 11.7 doesn't say how frequently things have to be
Yeah.
revalidated from scratch. It's okay typically to for well, it depends on the tiering, but just reviewing things once a year and doing a full revalidations once in 5 years is generally perfectly fine. And SEC for certain models demands a full revaluation every year. I don't know why, just to show that they are important.
Right.
Just
Well, I'm
And
looking in here. This is the paper that I've seen a few times. It's weird because it says that they're implementing OCC, but there must be something specific about the way that they do it, like you said, with a mandatory frequency or something like this. Risk methodology. I don't know. I guess I have to read this. It may just be a lot of legal stuff. But it's a paper that it's relatively recent.
and the Fed and the NFA don't have a whole lot in writing, but you find out very quickly from their exams what it is that they're after.
Right.
yeah. Yeah, I think it's more correct to say they don't have anything public in writing. They do have work programs, very detailed, but it's internal. It's not public.
Right. You
Okay.
don't get to see it, but you find out
Mhm.
what's in it by
Right.
Mhm.
The
them by what
examiners. Yeah.
examiners will ask you a question like what why was this model not looked at by model validation for 2.5 years? And that tells you their standard is it has to be less than 2.5 years.
Well,
And
here there's the concept. I haven't seen this before. Sorry to cut you off, but it says my internet connection is bad, so hopefully you can hear me. But annual model validation plan. So that seems to be something within the SEC, but that's like a corollary to OCC, or is that something you've seen
no,
somewhere
that's
else?
the annual model validation plan isn't actually a full validation. It's more like ongoing monitoring that you have
Okay.
to check every year and verify that the model is still working as intended.
Okay.
Yeah, actually, but no, SEC, no, a review is not enough. SEC for certain models demands a full reval from scratch every year.
Right, depending on the tier.
Yeah, depending on the tier. Yeah,
Right.
yeah,
For other than tier one models, it's just show them that it hasn't broken since last year. For the tier one models, it's show them that it works. Go and repeat some of the tests, uh, start over from scratch, and it's intended to be painful.
Right. I see. So I thought you put it in an email. I was looking. So this is, what am I doing? Oh, this is just stack. Okay. I don't know what I'm doing here. So let me get out of this. This is back to the SEC thing. The
Mhm.
thing that I was on a minute ago just looks, this is easier to do here.
It's just a list of links.
Right. So I'll capture this and anyway, I'll look at that later. But this is like personnel, or the control structure, I guess.
Hmm.
And then it says other non-substantive changes. So I guess that's all we need to think about here. Yeah, so if either of you have links to documents that are formal, as you said, and my experience with CFTC was and NFA was that they were more kind of in the moment than quoting some actual written guidance as well.
Right. And in Britain, they tend to be, well, they call themselves principles based rather than rules based, which means
Right.
they don't have a whole lot in writing. But you
Yeah.
have to understand what their intention was when they wrote that small amount, and
Yeah.
be very careful to demonstrate that you understood that intention.
Right. Okay, so then I'll stop this. I can go back into it. So unless there's other comments on the agencies and things,
Yeah, I saw that.
I am going to pursue. Go ahead, sorry.
Yes, sorry. Yeah, apologies. You might want to also mention SR 1518 and 1519, which kind of deals with capital. So as Martin was saying, it's mostly for, well, it is for large banks, CCAR, DFAST, because they do have some discussion on governance of models and also qualitative estimates.
Yeah.
So that stuff is not necessary for smaller banks, but if you
That's why there are two publications, one for the large banks and the others for the small banks.
Yes, and well, the smallest banks don't need to do either one. So so those are 18 and 19, 15, 18, 15, 19, right, for like very large bank and I guess medium-sized banks, and they do affect so if you're sort of trying to have a collection of everything that applies to larger banks, you definitely need to keep those two in mind. Yeah.
Okay. And then, yeah, I mean, and I'm trying to learn about the other countries. I'll just say, I did see an UAE post and I responded, just a guy from UAE. So now I have someone I can talk to there. But he said, oh my God, 300 banks in the US are going to fail. But he doesn't know the denominator, right? 300 banks is only about 4% of the US's banks. I said, you got about 100 banks in the UAE. It looks like if 4 of them fail, is that a banking system failure? 4 out of 100, So, yeah. All right. And then the last thing I wanted to talk about that Dimitri and I had talked about a little bit, I think, Martin, this, is there like a write-up of how the history of this, even just from my own use, about how some of it descended from the Los Alamos environment? Because my understanding would be that would be something that could be taught to students that, okay, in the wide world of physics and of science and engineering, you have peer review and nothing's confidential. So you can hash out your ideas. At a bank, you just like at Los Alamos, you had to have everything reviewed internally because it's confidential, secret sauce, cold war, et cetera. So that's maybe some motivation for the independent validation group, and that the core. That's what I think Dimitri made that statement. That SR 11.7 kind of comes from the Los Alamos papers on the philosophy of model risk management. Is that, yeah?
Which ultimately all comes from Jan Dash.
Okay.
Who, remember, was at CERN.
Well, we already mentioned, yeah.
Yeah.
That's cool.
I remember at the time he came up with it, I was talking to him at a conference, and he said that things were way too politically hot for him to be in development at the time. So he'd come up with this new idea called model validation, and it let him get away from ducking. It let him get away from the crossfire, and he didn't have to duck as much.
Yeah, and then I mean, at least when I anecdotally talk about 2011 and how, I mean, you were a big part of how I got into model risk management to begin with, but that we were having those conversations around 2011, that's probably not a coincidence with the guidance coming out.
Right. The guidance was SR 2011-7 was written in 2004.
Right. Well, I think OCC and FRB, but wasn't it the great financial crisis that pushed them to do 2011, or that was
It was what pushed them to publish it.
Okay. Right. Yeah,
It
so
would-
maybe not that much has to be said about that,
Yeah.
but
I mean, generally, the way these SR letters work, not only this one is they get circulated in draft form for years, and people look at them and comment, and having this thing in a draft state continuously revised for 10 or more years is not unusual at all. I mean, there's a whole bunch of stuff circulating right now in draft, which may or may not, and sometimes they never become official SR letters.
right. I just want to give some of that flavor because like when I was doing my work in Berkeley, everything I was doing was peacetime, but there was Star Wars and there was all this other stuff that, Reagan was at least in office for I think my first 4 years of graduate school, 80, 88. But like I had friends who, and so there was like peacetime money as kind of a dividend of the DoD money at Livermore. Livermore, if you don't know, that's the one that Teller pushed for because he wanted his own lab because I think he hated Oppenheimer's guts and everything and Beta and everybody else. But there were computers, there were like cross sections of various high Z elements that you had to have a security clearance to be able to get access to that cross section. Because if it's plutonium or whatever, then then clearly you might be using it to make a bomb. So that was just crazy, I think. Then the whole idea that came out with right, they called it the Strategic Defense Initiative, but everybody called it Star Wars. So SDI, when I'm in the midst of thinking about where to go to graduate school and then starting to write my thesis, thinking my thesis could be locked in a vault in Livermore. On the other hand, there's a hilariously funny part of it because the people I knew in the physics department in Berkeley had a good relationship with the people in Livermore. Berkeley still manages Los Alamos and Livermore, even though just because of Oppenheimer and because Berkeley was like one of the few universities in the West at the time of in World War II that was really had a prestigious science department. But yeah, you could get like oscilloscopes from Los Alamos because they would buy like 1,000 oscilloscopes and have them in a warehouse, and they would be using them, and they would be, making sure that they were safe around bombing these, these weapons experiments. So if you wanted one, they'd say, yeah, just take this. We don't need this one. So a lot of people were indirectly, say, using defense funds, things. Anyway, but it's
we had lots of people at Caltech were using synchrotron lead bricks as doorstops.
right.
They had a somewhat defense related synchrotron and then decided it was too small and we're going to build a bigger one somewhere else, and they weren't going to spend the money to move all that lead bricks around. They're incredibly heavy, so students just sort of started swiping them.
Yeah, do you know how Oppenheimer divided his time, by the way? And there weren't a lot of planes back then either, right? So he's teaching, there's a joint appointment at both Caltech and Cal and Berkeley.
As far as I know, he I don't know. He didn't. I don't think he hung around Caltech much.
Yeah. Well, there must not have been much in Pasadena in the 40s. I mean, I would think.
Well, Einstein was there,
Right. That's right.
and
And a young Richard Feynman.
yeah, Feynman was there, and I think not a whole lot, but Feynman liked it that way because they had better stripper bars.
Well, Feynman was one of the co-heads of, or one of the subheads of the theory division at Los Alamos. So Oppenheimer, of course, knew him. So
Right, and he basically got the job because Beta was giving some presentation and Feynman was asking him pointed questions, and Beta said, hire him. He's the only person who ever questioned me that much. He's the only person who doesn't just defer to my authority.
yeah, I should circulate that list. I guess I haven't seen it. I guess I thought you guys would know all the things in the talk that I gave to my synagogue brotherhood about Oppenheimer and American Jew and Jewish Americans of physics. But there is a rabbi who came up with a list that was that was typed by Oppenheimer's secretary, which has the staff circa like, 1944 of the theory division. And it's pretty incredible. It's like, reading a list of the greatest actors of all time or whatever. And so I think it went Oppenheimer, von Neumann, Bethe, and then into the individual subheads. Wigner may have been, Teller was definitely not one of the senior people, but Teller was working for someone. Yeah. Serber, I think, was the head of one of the divisions.
Right.
Serber is the one, Dimitri, that Oppenheimer, being the only Jew on the UC Berkeley faculty, said, Serber was incredible in the Manhattan Project. So is his wife. I mean, his wife was the only female physicist who really contributed, I think, to Manhattan Project. But he said, Serber's an assistant professor. He really deserves tenure. You really, just like you market any good junior faculty. And Burge, who unfortunately is what the modern of the two Berkeley physics buildings is named after, Raymond Burge, said, we already have a Jew. It's like we have our token Jew, and that's you, Oppie. So we're not going to hire another Jew.
Sounds typical. Mhm.
Crazy. Yeah, it's like when my girlfriend in Moscow was contemplating going from nursing into applied math, and she said, should I do applied math? And they said, no, don't do applied math. That whole department is Jews. That's it can happen in the US, it can happen in Russia.
It happened at Caltech until like the 30s. There were no Jews at all because Millikan made sure there weren't any.
SOB, yeah. Oh, and here's a matter of interest. We can, I think, wrap, but I have a high school buddy. Actually, I know Dr. Ruth, if you want to give sympathy or whatever, if you know Dr. Ruth Westheimer, I know her son. I was just at the Shiva yesterday, actually, in Riverdale. So if you want to send condolences or if you'd like to see the Riverside Memorial Chapel did the service and they have a recording of that, I can send you the link to that. He's great. He's a professor at the University of Toronto. He's in education, but really smart guy, Princeton and then Stanford PhD. Her son, you have to take after the credit of her, from the Haganah to being, the radio personality. I have a shot of her at like 19 with a rifle in the Haganah outfit. So she's a pretty amazing lady. But why was I remembering that? Dr. Ruth. So my buddy, maybe he'll make an expanded version of her documentary like the last 5 years. But he's a documentary writer. He has not done a lot in science, but he got this idea from someone who indirectly knew Röntgen by generations. And so he's actually doing a documentary on Röntgen, the first physics Nobelist, the one who, at least the Germans say, discovered X-rays. And that famous one with his wife's wedding ring finger was the first one. And then the use actually in World War I of Army hospitals using crude X-ray machines to look at injuries, bone injuries. But pretty interesting guy. Had a lot of struggles in trying to maintain a position in academia, from what I understand, and worked largely in the Netherlands, not in Germany. But so they're developing that. If you're interested, or if you know people who are historians who could help him, he's a producer, he's not a scientist, so he's looking mainly for backing, maintaining the rights. But if there's content that could be added to his film, let me know. And I talked to him a lot. I mean, I was just with him yesterday at the Shiva, so yeah, we talked about that.
All right, then we'll talk again next week.
Give you back 5 minutes. Yeah. Have a great
Bye.
week. Stay cool. Stay cool.
Okay. Okay.